Recording.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Meg.
Hi.
Hi, Meg.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to join us before we get started on the program. It's so cool to see everybody. Like,
You're muted, Meg.
ah, that's good. I was just saying hi to some people, recognizing so many names coming in. And we're just still letting people come in.
Yeah, that book.
So I'll give it another minute or two while people join us.
This is
I think everybody's muted, but if you have a comment and you want to put it in the chat or tell us where you're coming from in the chat, that would be lovely. I know so many of the people here, but not everybody. Hey, Kevin. Betsy, there's something in the chat that Laura's asking, could we give page numbers in our books? So when we read, and I'm happy to do that. And whoever is following along in a book of Betsy's or mine, that's great. And if you don't have one, you can buy them on Amazon or your local bookstore, or you can buy my book on thepoetscorner.org/shop. I think there's just, a few more people in the waiting room coming in. That's great. We've got somebody from Northampton, England, from Calgary. Oh, and my niece Tracy and my great nephew Camden from Atlanta are here. People from my poetry group. This is great. All right, I think we should get started because we have a very full program. So I'm going to begin and just welcome everybody. I'm so pleased that so many of you set aside time today to show up for this reading. And I'm just thrilled to be sharing it with Betsy Sholl, a favorite poet, mentor, teacher, and so many things I will say about Betsy later. But this is the first time that I've been the spotlight of the Poet's Corner. So I'm a little nervous about that. And I'm excited about it too. The book launch for my very first collection of poetry called Magma Intrusions. But a little bit first about the Poet's Corner. It was founded in June of 2020 with my dear friend Catherine Seitz. And although she's no longer involved because of health concerns that she has, but her enthusiasm was part of this germ of an idea. We were all sheltered in. We were writing alone, and we were craving more community. So we created this platform to create community among writers and readers of poetry and short prose. And it's grown to more than 3,000 members today from all over the world. And a lot of them from Maine, but from all different places. And if you saw today, we have people here from England and Calgary, Canada, and so many other places. So we host monthly readings on Zoom, usually the second Sunday of each month, always free and open to the public. And we've hosted so many wonderful writers, and I've gotten to know them, some of them well-known, some emerging, all of them wonderful. This fall on October 8th, we will have Spencer Reese, who is an Episcopal priest and a poet who's lived in Nicaragua and done work there in Spain and now in Rhode Island. And he will be joined by Matt Daly, a poet and creative writing teacher from Wyoming. And they will both be on Zoom from Wyoming for this reading. In October, we will also launch our third annual Ekphrastic Challenge in collaboration with Page Gallery in Camden. They hang an exhibition of art, paintings, drawings, photographs, sometimes sculpture, in the gallery in Camden, but also online. And anyone is invited to write poems in response to any of the images in the exhibition. 10 poems are selected by the Poets Corner to be read on the Poets Corner on November 12th, and 10 or so are selected by the artists themselves to be read in the gallery on November 18th. And on December 3rd, we'll return with Mark Burrows, the award-winning translator of Rilke, with his annual Rilke reading. And his guests this year will include Padraig Ó Tuama and also Marie Howe. And this is a very popular event. I'm also super pleased to announce that this year we are partnering with the independent press Toad Hall Editions on our biannual chapbook competition. It opens in January of 2024. And Marie Howe will be the judge for that. So now for today. Betsy and I will each read for maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for conversation and Q&A that you can put into the chat with whatever questions you have. I am just really thrilled that Betsy agreed to read with me. She was my first poetry teacher. In 2009, I just graduated with an MFA from Lesley University in creative nonfiction. And I was working full-time at USM. Betsy taught an undergraduate class in poetry writing that was open to community students, and Collie Lightfoot told me about it and recommended it to me. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do that. It was in 2011, I think. And I was just turning 60 at the time. And I fell in love with poetry in her class. Her enthusiasm for it, for the students' work, her patience and her encouragement to experiment and try different things and to memorize poems and look at poems closely. And all the while, I think she was still Poet Laureate of Maine at the time, which comes with its own responsibilities. But her generosity and her insight were just boundless and still are. And her encouragement of my early attempts to write were what kept me going. So Betsy has published 10 collections of poetry, been the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including from the National Endowment for the Arts and Maine's Literary Award for Distinguished Achievement, among others. She's a woman of many accomplishments and teaches at USM and in the MFA program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. To get to know her by her resume is one thing, but it's even richer and more interesting, I think, to read and today to get to listen to her read her poetry in its depth and compassion and close observation of the world and the harmonies, the connections she sees among seemingly disparate things and pulls them together in a way that helps me and helps us make sense of the world. So please join me in welcoming Betsy Sholl to the Poets Corner.
Well, you know, I'm grateful to be here. The Poets Corner has been just the most remarkable thing. And when I introduce Meg, maybe I'll say a little bit more about this, but talk about generosity. She's really something. You know, she retires from one thing only to create a new opportunity for somebody in another thing. And it's just a delight to be here. And a little intimidating to see so many of you. So I'm going to read from this book this new book that I haven't really read much from. And my sister, this is a poem in part about my sister, and I don't know if she actually figured out how to get on this or not, but it is a poem that makes a couple of associations. It's called Practice. It's about watching my sister practice piano. And Sappho comes in. We grew up on the Jersey Shore, and Sappho lived in a shore town on the island of Mytilene. That's where she grew up. And so that's why she appears here. Practice. It all crowds back. My sister hunched over the keys, cluster of notes her hands can't reach or make fast enough. She tries over and over that one tiny patch of Bach pulled out from the rest like rubble at the shore we poked through for treasure. If you are squeamish, Sappho says, don't prod the beach rubble. Sappho, who lived by the sea, soaking in its rhythms, that first heavy wave shush hitting shore, then the next softer shush, and again shush. My sister shushed me over and over as she prodded those keys until finally a cloud would burst. Her fists would slam down in a crash of sound, a wail of how she'll never get it right, never be good enough. It's too hard. But then the storm would pass and she'd be trying again. For years, I heard only repeated pieces, like our old Evinrude refusing to start, the choke not right, the engine not catching, no sputter and shift into glide. I had no clue what magnificent cargo my sister was trying to haul, what was inside the piano and inside her. Depths the ocean only hints at, tossing up rubble, fragments of Sappho, notes my sister now lifts off the page, pours through her hands until, if you didn't know, you'd think it was always easy, always whole. So I read that to my sister once and she said, I don't like that poem. And I said, well, it gets better. Sorry. I was supposed to be better about finding my poems here. I wanted to read a poem that's maybe a little more political. Because I was very upset in 2017 when there was that white racist march on Charlottesville, Virginia. And a few months afterwards, I was reading a lot of the poet Charles Wright, who is from Charlottesville. So this is a poem called On a Line by Charles Wright. And the first line is Wright's line. God is the fire my feet are held to. He writes from his yard in Charlottesville. And first I picture not marchers, but my father's black and white world, his walls and gates to keep everyone in place, going up in smoke and charred souls. Today, the sun turned its back on us, leaving snow, rain, deep slush in the road, so cars whoosh by like monster angels, slashing the air with huge transparent wings. Such a heavy sky, low, a winter white, not even close to the color of my skin. Who decided to call us white when we are clearly a pale beige version of the rich gleaming dark we came from, watered down, as if that makes anything pure? Get over it, my sad brothers storming hateful and headless through town. Read Dante before rage makes you gnaw your own flesh, leaves you glaring under burning muck, flakes of roof, rebar, smoldering cars. If you don't like to read, give a listen to Thelonious Monk, his tunes seared clean and spare, hammer and hesitation. The way he fingers the keyboard, you know it's true. The piano ain't got no wrong notes, but it does got under and between notes, over notes, bent, blending, got Monk playing not sorry, but wake up. So maybe the flame God holds our feet to could be cool. If we'd toss in our old lies, my brothers, you're them and us. If you saw, my father, how they're burning us up inside. I think I misread that they were hateful and headless through town. I meant hoodless. So this next poem is one that Meg mentioned to me as we were talking about this reading. It's a prose poem, and it's called A Showing of Acorns. And, at least people from this time, this part of the country may remember a few years ago, we had an abundance of acorns. And showing comes from what the mystic Julian of Norwich called her visions. She was holding a hazelnut, and she said this, in this little thing, I saw three properties. The first is that God made it, the second, that God loves it, and the third, that God keeps it. So for me, it was acorns, a showing of acorns. They don't have wings, so only fly when the wind's strong. Fly, then fall, bounce a little when they land. Their hats have no straps. Children draw eyes and mouths so they have faces, but no ears, no legs or arms either. Thalidomide babies. Like my schoolmate Bill with his one leg, who'd windmill down the long college hill on his crutches, whistling as he flew. Such abundance that year too, such abandon and dance, a great undoing. Day and night, they ping on car roofs, clutter the sidewalk, cars park and drive off, filling the gutter with coarse meal. For hands, the surgeons made Bill a set of pinchers so he could grasp pencils, button his shirts, hold a racket, and sometimes gently squeeze my shoulder as we stood talking. This morning, an acorn struck me on the forehead as if to knock in a little enlightenment, or to bring back Bill, whose name I can't recall, though he was made and loved and therefore beyond me remains. I have two sisters, and our oldest sister died a few years ago, and this is a sort of elegy for her. It's called Whatever Alights. A zillion yeses to the titmice at my feeder, to their silky gray backs, their white bellies tinged with rust, their little black eyes. Yes, to the fruit and nut mix that draws them, to the runner who scares them off, the nuthatch who comes back first. And yes, to my sister, suddenly back from the dead, as if from Austin, calling the bird silly for the way it spirals along the tree trunk upside down. And why not? Yes, as well, to her taking the last of the cereal, the wine, retelling the plot of her novel, Memories, one door she can still open. After years of being smart in 4 languages and dumb in the dialect of feeling, years of so what to the birds and how stupid the crepe myrtle, she's back gentled. And because a woman, she sings as I fold laundry, songs from Cameroon. She who worked hard and grudgingly for God, as if God were more chore than marvel. She who divided the world into like and dislike, useful, useless, broken, fixable. I wonder if on the other side of the river, that Rio Grande only the dead can cross, the birds are no longer nervous, the air free of predators. When she returns, my sister no longer limps, hardly grumbles, or says stupid when really she means sad. It's as if she's back inside our mother, hearing the soothe of muffled cadences before words, before yes and no, whatever hurt her, whatever alighted, and then before she could hold it, flew or was snatched away. If I am checking the time right, I will read 2 more poems. So the last part of this book is poems about grief, because my husband of many, many years, my beautiful husband, died of COVID in 2020. So this poem, I forgot, I guess I was supposed to give page numbers and I forgot. This is page 95. Widow walking. I don't want a day when I never think of you, but I would like more in the morning news than another briefing on your absence. I miss hearing my name as summons to a kiss. If we can't step into the same river twice, with the past, it's not even once. Memories are hot watches, knockoffs pinned to the inside of my coat. I open it and become a flasher. At least the wind is wild today, the trees in a frenzy. If I wore a wig, it would be long gone, snagged in the crook of a tree, but good for containing something that starts off fragile, then grows wings. If you are spirit now, can you hear me? Or have you left our flesh too far behind? Somehow I've landed at the shore, where late sun makes the seagrass glow, and for a second I don't want to hold you or anything, not moonrise in the east or sun gleam in the west, not the path of watery light washing my feet. Still, I can't stop talking to you. Grief is a heavy coat dragging the ground, but death is very cold, so I wear it. And I will end with the only other prose poem in this book, actually. It's called The Birthday Party, and it is set on a beach in Scarborough, Maine. And the first 4 words are in italics because the speaker overhears them. The birthday party. The hand of God on the lips of a bikinied woman as she trudges through the sand with her friend. Could be wind or a burning tree, a stranger brushing her shoulder. Or maybe a kind of answer to the boy newly 10, who's just asked if being a grown-up is hard. What to say? Even the history of these stones tossed by waves and now skipped across them by the boy may include fire, ice, crushed ferns. So little is straightforward. First the kiss he gave his mother, then his squirm out of her arms back to the water. Whoever said love isn't complicated, if he wasn't a fool, must have passed through some burning gate found only by those who have stopped trying to grasp or explain. How to tell the boy? None of us, when we agreed to breathe, crawl, walk, read, knew the journey would not reveal itself in advance. So our best maps are dreams, Escher-like roads that dissolve, then reappear, looped through tilting scaffolds. But never mind, never mind. Now the boy's mother photographs the sky, slant of clouds rippled and glowing, a sermon in which awe overwhelms uncertainty, and dread has no place here, where low tide reflects the splendor overhead. Yes, the sky will dissolve its radiant path, as if to say, looking elsewhere is not the answer. This will turn into that, cake into crumbs, bright wrappings into balled up trash. And yes, it is hard, but there are gifts, child, gifts, you among them. Thank you. And now I am going to introduce Meg, a person I think most of you know and who needs no introduction. But when you buy Meg's book, I do not say if, I say when, you will read a fuller biography of her many accomplishments. I'm only going to mention here that along with being a leader in higher ed and business, Meg was president of the Maine Media College for 8 years and is co-founder of this wonderful and amazing Poets Corner that sponsors readings and workshops and contests and really has created an international community. Meg is an accomplished photographer and poet, and we're here to celebrate her first full-length collection of poems, Magma Intrusions. One of the many things I admire about Meg's poems is her keen eye, her photographer's eye transposed into language with precise and vivid detail. Another thing is her sweeping perspective that includes the personal in moving ways and also looks up to the cosmos and looks down deep into geologic time and our Earth's fiery beginnings. It's a wonderful thing to have a poet who can teach us real things like what magma intrusion is, who can speak about the world with acute precision and also see those details metaphorically. The gift of these poems is how observation creates revelation. The gift of these poems is the generous spirit Meg displays in everyone. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Betsy. This was worth doing just for that introduction. That was lovely. Thank you. And especially for having you read those wonderful poems. I can't wait to talk to you more about them and other things. So, but first, so I will be reading from my book, Magma Intrusions, and you can buy it on Amazon or on thepoetscorner.org. Before I begin, I want to thank a few people There's so many I should, but this is not the Academy Awards. But there's several people who have taught me the craft, Betsy among them, but other teachers such as Richard Blanco, Tess Taylor, Ellen Bass, and most especially Kevin Pilkington. Kevin is here, and he's the one that really pushed me to put together a manuscript and start sending it out. And I so appreciate it. He's also the one that saved me from sticking it in the bottom drawer when I began to get rejections. So, and he'd just say, keep pulling it out, keep sending it out. So thank you, Kevin, for all of your encouragement and support. And for, I've learned so much about the craft from you. I also want to thank Carla Serrett, who is on, who helped me with the editing of these poems before I sent the manuscript out. That was generous and just wonderful. To Karen Kelsey at Kelsey Books, who chose to publish it. And a special thanks to my husband, Roger, who the book is dedicated to, so you can read that dedication. But he also carefully proofread every copy for me, never said, I'm sick of reading these poems. So thank you, Roger. And many, many poets who I've gotten to know through the Poets Corner, through my workshops and poetry groups along the way. And without that support, I think, it takes village, and writing poetry for me is a solo experience, but it's also a connection experience. And I've discovered that in so many ways. So that's enough for the Academy Awards piece, but I'm going to start reading by reading an introduction about Magma Intrusions. But somebody in a manuscript workshop I was taking said, oh, that's a terrible name. Nobody's going to buy a book named Magma Intrusions. And thankfully, I didn't listen to them because I was attached to the name. And I think, maybe people pick it up because they don't know what those are. But I also think people will pick it up because this beautiful cover art, which is by Dudley Zopp. And Dudley is an artist I've long admired. And so I said, I would love a book cover that I think, might be one of your geologic images. So she invited me to her studio and I got to look through images. And this is a digital alteration of one of her images called Phosphorus 4. And it's called Phosphorus Red. So thank you, Dudley, for that. And so I will begin. Enough with the introductions, but this is an introduction. Magma intrusions are formed by fluid volcanic matter that penetrates the spaces between local rocks. These superheated igneous intrusions crystallize from the molten magma and can be seen in black or white lines that write their story on the granite of Maine's coastlines. I've been obsessed with volcanoes since childhood and traveled all over the world to witness eruptions. But in Maine, where I've lived for 50 years, I have to go back 500 million years to connect with the time when volcanoes were active. As I trace the lines of magma intrusions with my bare toes on Maine's rocky shores, I think of what lies below the surface, the hot spots that shape and form the geology, not only of the land, but also of a life. So the first poem I'm going to read is called 500 Million Years Before, and it's on page 20 in the book. I was born from the sea, made of stars, to trace a path across the earth on footprints of fire. A sea was here before this sea, now visible in rocks, mountains, quarries, and sand of limestone, schist, and shale. Once lava flourished, formed island arcs, those distant mountains mostly washed away. Continents collided as the Iapetus Ocean slid into the lithosphere, plunging downward to the east. Another ocean formed, the one I learned to swim in, the sweet and sometimes violent tumult of the waves, the Atlantic wedged between America and Europe. Glaciers retreated, stranding erratic rocks, their sculptural presence to remind us of absence. Icy ancestors carved out rocks and waterfalls. I arrived in Maine in '74 amidst a recession, no jobs to be found. We lived on food stamps in a winter rental at the edge of the ocean, the granite outreach home to seals in winter. I had nothing but time to pick rose hips from shoreline shrubs, make jam, knead yeast and flour, bake bread, and sew. Time to photograph, make prints in the darkroom, and wonder. I worried about no job, no money, and a wise friend said to me, "Don't worry about the money, worry about time. You'll never have it again like this. So much of it, so few demands." The next poem I want to read is called Prophecies Are Coming True. And let me find it. It's on page 49. And it was written just before a very dear friend of mine, Catherine Greenleaf, passed away in December of 2020. And before she died, I had gone to Bethel and stayed in a cottage a friend of mine had, and I'd written this poem, and I had a chance to read it to Kath on her when we were sitting out on her front porch, and she was wondering if she would be missed when she passed away. She was fighting cancer at that point. So it's called, the sign reads, Prophecies Are Coming True. The moon and Mars peered through 60-foot pines in night's dark poetry. Something wild awakened me, screeching coyotes pouncing on prey. The moon appeared as olivine crystals glowing gold from a meteor's crash. The largest meteor to hit the earth in Namibia heated sand so hot it fused into blown glass. Yellow orbs in the desert, visits from the stars. My startled eyes open, the dream doctor's voice lingers. She is on the final elevator ride down. My friend stands as tall as the king's pines, irreverent as a circus of squirrels launching from delicate limbs, full of truth only a true friend speaks. She's been by my side for decades of tangled travels, now at the end of her journey. Will she stay with me as the glimmering magneto-rotational swirl around the black hole in my galaxy? So I was going to read the next poem called Cigarettes and Clay, which is about my mother, but I think I'm going to choose a different poem because I think my brother's on this reading, and the one before him was written for my brother. So I hope he's here to hear this one. I know he's heard it before. It's called Gun-Shy Little Sister. We're both in black cowboy hats, only he's staring down the barrel of his gun, one eye closed, ready to fire at whoever crosses his path. He's always been the gunslinger in our not-so-okay corral, quick to anger, taking the hard road, blazing a trail. I'm shyly fingering this weapon still in its holster. I'm thankful he kept our enemies engaged while I figured out a different track. In another shot, I'm wearing a single feather in a band around my head. I've tried on many hats before I found my poet's cap, always staying out of the line of fire. Thank you, Bob. Next poem I read is on page 56, and it's called Maine Winter, and it's a love poem to my husband, Roger, and to Maine's winter. November. Slanted light gilds tree trunks in disappearing daylight, the creeping lengths of shadows echoing in the bay. I've always been drawn to the sea, the smoke that rises off the water when the air grows cold, the water still warm. The sea brought you to me. December. Cold rain, the temperature drops, and suddenly trees are glazed in ice. Sun shimmering through a forest, and the world stays frozen as glittering time stops in prisms of glass leaves. At night, the full moon spotlights the branches. You and I walk out in slippers to gaze at the sky. January. You sit on shore and I skate onto the frozen ice, a mirror with deep traces of white lines, a Moreau canvas with patches of blue sky on the black and white pond, quenching my thirst for perfect ice beneath the blades of my skates. You watch from shore as I glide past. February. Midwinter night and we're driving home. Time warps when you put the high beams on, watching the snow swirl blinding white flakes in every direction across a black tunnel of time, unending as the road disappears. We're lost in a blizzard of memories, those we've shared about driving in the snow, lost or afraid, or alone or with another, and those we haven't shared of past loves falling in and out of love's grasp. And why now? I am feeling awe looking out at the grimy windshield of an SUV hurtling along a country road, trees lurching into view, fence posts dragging past. We are lost in this moment, only this moment, with you alone. So I'm about to head to Iceland, and I thought I would read a poem that was written in 2021 when we were in Iceland called Arctic Turns. In Iceland this spring, Arctic terns circle overhead all day, a day that lasts and lasts turning twilight towards midnight, fusing pink in pre-dawn light at 3. 50,000 miles from Arctic to Antarctica, Iceland's coast to the Weddell Sea and return. In a lifetime, they might have winged to the moon and back 3 times. Aerodynamic wings slice the wind and clouds. They soar, screeching songs higher and higher, a breeding dance in this land of moss and tundra, pumice rocks and wind-blown shores. I hear their voices in my mind as I migrate home to Maine, imagine the map of their journey, following across the Atlantic, tracing the coasts of Africa and South America, as if they knew this route before the continents split. And for my last poem, I'm going to read a long poem that was written, the first version certainly, was written in this class with Betsy, and one of our assignments was write a long poem. And I had never tried that before. And this one is also written to and about my nephew, who is the host, the technical host of the Poets Corner today and always, and I'm grateful to him for that. His name is Lucas Adair. And the poem is called, so it was written, about a conversation we'd had when he was about 12 years old, I think. My nephew asks, if you knew you were dying, would you jump into a lava lake? A tongue of lava licking the shore, gulping the ocean in great breaths, photographed in a magazine. My mother once showed me Surtsey, an island named for the Norse god of fire, and emerging from under the sea on my 12th birthday. I tell this story so often that the tale is knitted together with threads of fiction and memory, now so intertwined I can no longer pull them apart. Smoke and incantations, a spell of land rising from under the sea until the island claimed its right to be on the surface of the earth. My mother built a fire on the beach and told us stories by its light while the smoke wandered through the sky and sparks flew like fireflies in the night. She wore the sweater she'd knitted 3 times over for my father, who still never wore it. She said she was like Penelope. This was years before I knew Penelope was the long-suffering wife of Ulysses, and I thought she was just another bad knitter like my mother. A chemist and an artist, she threw pots on a wheel in the basement and painted them with glazes mixed and fired in the kilns of her imagination. Would you climb into a coffin and slide into the kiln of a crematorium? I respond to my nephew. My mother was young when she died, her heart ripped apart by love's disappointments and struggling to claim her own right to be. Yet the seed was planted for my future odyssey, to travel the world, to witness an eruption, to capture its essence in a photograph. That year we went to Iceland after her death, after Eldfeld's explosion. There was nothing to see but the village of Heimei buried in ash and the island of Surtsey beyond reach out to sea. No, really, my nephew persists, but why not jump into the crater? Isn't that the ultimate climax for someone who loves volcanoes? I flew to Hawaii when Kilauea burst forth in a curtain of fire like campfires of war, stretched along miles of earth torn apart, reft and bereft by forces that couldn't be mended. Shrouded in smoke, liquid fire consuming the landscape and folding it over, black on black forms braided in ropes stretching down to the sea, exploding in steam, sparks thrown through the air, the act of creation extending the land. Don't you risk death every time you run off to photograph an eruption? My nephew wants to convince me of this. Last year, I went to Iceland when the earth opened up on the edge of a glacier, melding fire and ice. I flew next out to Heimaey, climbed the old cinder cone, and perched atop Eldfell, looked beyond out to sea. Over the years, waves have softened the edges, birds nest on its shore, green graces horizons. Surtsey has changed now, but the rat-shaped island's still squatting 50 years later, still fighting the waves and claiming its place. That's different, I tell him, wondering how to explain. Life lived close to the edge is not choosing to die. Thank you. Oh, now, Betsy, will you join me and we'll have some conversation about poems and poetry and whatever else we choose. Oh, there we go. That's great. So I'm going to start, if I could, and maybe it's an easy one, but you didn't read the poem "The Bear," but it contains the line that's the title to your book, "As If a Song Could Save You," which is such a beautiful title, and it's just one line in one poem, and I was wondering how you chose it and how you came about it as the title, because it just says so much.
Well, titles are hard. I almost never find a title easily. And I went through a bunch and nothing seemed right. And then, I think I was drifting off to sleep one night and I remembered that line and I thought maybe that would work. And then I woke up the next day and I forgot it. And it took me a while to dredge it back. And there's a lot of reference to music in the book. And, in that particular poem, it's a little bit offhand, right? Actually, the speaker is singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall to scare off the bear. But as the book goes on, towards the end, there is some music that in a way does help save the speaker. So it felt like the title could morph. Yeah.
It very much does. It encompasses so much in the music in your poems and the musical references and the grief and yeah.
Well, I have a question for you. I'm just so impressed, and the people who heard you read could hear your kind of stunning moments of observation. In Whooper Swans, you write, "The strong wings bristled at my intrusion, rushed from the brush to enter the water, swam in circles, each movement an arc of grace, thrusting its neck forward, gliding his full white body back and forth, his eyes on me." I mean, that's so vivid. And I know you have studied photography. So I'm wondering two things. One is how you see the relationship of that observation through a lens and through language.
Well, that's a great question because, I think I came at this first from photography
Mm.
and imagery, and poetry is so much about images and imagery. And so often a poem comes to me either from a photograph or from a photograph in my mind or an image in my mind. And that particular poem, Whooper Swans, was written, I think, in that same year in Iceland, when there was an experience I had with this swan that we walked every day down to the pond, and he was there. And he was protecting a nest of phalaropes, they weren't even his kin, his birds. And
Wow.
he seemed to be protecting that nest. So that just, kind of that whole image. I mean, I have photographs of it, but the image and the experience stuck in my head. But I could probably name so many. I could probably match some photographs to so many of the poems in this book. In fact, a friend of mine asked me for one of my volcano photographs once, and I sent it to him, and he said, well, what's the provenance of this image? And I said, well, actually, there's a poem that goes with that. And so he ended up framing them together beautifully, and generously decided that he would give me the gift of giving me back my photograph in this beautiful frame with the poem to it. So it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up for that, because in one of your poems, which I didn't write down, you talk about being it's a poem about your family being on a beach at night, and you talk about being the one behind the lens, observing and framing. And I just thought, do you see that as part of your role as a poet, to observe and frame and shape what you see?
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but isn't that because when you're a photographer, you can be with a group of photographers, and we never take the same picture because you choose the frame.
Mhm.
And I think the same when we're writing, we can all have the same prompt or something to write, and we come up with totally different poems from that same prompt. So we choose the frame, we choose what to include in it and what to exclude from it. And, that's it. I hadn't really thought about that, Betsy, and as a way to look at how one writes poetry. And so would you do the same? Maybe you would talk about images and frames within, because I see in your poetry this less about a still image and more of a moving image, that you have this very close observation of people and circumstances, and then connect them with, other things. So maybe you could talk about that and images and framing in your poems.
That's interesting. I was thinking, I feel in a way when I start a poem, I have no idea where it's going, no idea whatsoever. And so I almost feel like, for me, beginning a poem is trying to move. It's more like trying to create a motion. I write a line or two, and then something comes into my head, and I think, how do I get from there to there? So in some ways that might be more musical. I'm not a musician. I don't have a vocabulary, and yet I somehow think it feels like it may be more how you compose a song. I don't know.
Well, that does sound musical, and that quote from Baron Wormser on your book, that talks about harmonies and your attunement to harmonies that are musical, spiritual, and earthly. And so we had a little bit of a conversation before about how you see the harmonies in this book, but maybe you could talk more about that, Betsy.
Well, in that conversation, I wrote it in that conversation, one of us said, I'm not sure if it was you or me, that harmony comes out of dissonance. And also we talk, one of us or both of us, that somehow metaphor becomes a kind of example of harmony, because you have two different things that seem to not have much to do with each other, and you put them together. When my daughter was in second or third grade, I went in to do poetry in the schools, and they were supposed to write a poem that had a color, an animal, a kind of motion, and begin with "I wish." So she wrote down, "I wish I had a horse. It should be white and run fast." And I'm saying, geez, you can do better than that. You know, I whisper. Then I was nice to all the other kids, and I went back to her paper, and there was a big smudge where she erased the period, and she had, "I wish I had a horse. It should be white and run faster than flags of snow."
Ooh.
And, to me, well, I stole it, first of all. Well, she was 7, right? I figured she wouldn't care. But I mean, to me, that is harmony in a way, putting those things together. And anybody who lives where it snows can picture flags of snow in all different ways. So yeah, so I guess I also think that, to make a poem or any kind of art, there's tension, right? There's, you can't raise your arm and without tension. So harmony in a way is maybe figuring out how to move through a poem and work with the tension to make a whole. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you were the one that said about dissonance, because it's been in my mind ever since. I've been thinking about that. Do they have to be in conflict with each other, or are they simply, well, just so different? But I think in many ways in your poems they are. They have that tension, and that's what makes them work, because we didn't expect to run across this plus that together. That one that you read with Thelonious Monk.
Okay.
Which one is that?
That was on a line by Charles Wright.
Yes, yes. Right. I wouldn't have expected, writing about that march and that incident. First of all, I wouldn't have expected Charles Wright to show up, and then Thelonious Monk to show up, and then all of the, different, I'm just trying to find it again so that I could look at it, because there were some other things that showed up, the no wrong notes, and who decided, oh, Dante shows up too.
Right. Dante tends to show up a lot.
Why is that?
And Monk does too. Well, I just every 5 years or so, I read through the entire Divine Comedy, maybe in different translations. And I just love being inside a long work. I read a canto a day.
Nice.
And so, so that's 100 days with Dante. So clearly he's going to show up.
What a great practice.
Yeah.
One of the things that you had us do in that class was memorize poems. And I realized from that practice how much it made us pay attention to every word, or made me pay attention to every word, because, you know, it couldn't just be what I thought might come next. It had to be precisely, and then it made me think about, why did that poet choose precisely that word?
And it also is a way to get the poem in the body.
Mm.
You know, and out of, you know, the intellectual space and into the physical space of our bodies. We have to say it and hear it and over and over and over again to memorize it. Yeah.
So that practice of reading Dante every day is a lot. You know, we're starting to get some questions from the
sure.
chat, and I want to ask you one from Ellen Goldsmith that said she's really interested in your elegy to your sister and thinking of it in terms of harmony and dissonance, and also a surprising continuum of time. Could you talk about that?
Well, you know, I mean, I when I wrote that poem, you know, I think that is a poem that I sat down and kind of wrote straight through it. It's not a poem I struggled with. I used to sit every day on the couch right by a window that had a bird feeder, and these different birds would come, and I was just beginning to write down what I saw, and the phrase "a zillion yeses" was in my mind from something I heard someone say, and I just began to write, and my sister appeared, and she's always been a complicated figure to me. She was very, very smart. She was 13 years older than I was. I went to kindergarten the year she went to college. So, you know, and she was very, very smart, but she did some kind of emotionally dumb things. And so that combination, you know, she spoke 4 languages, maybe more. She was a missionary for a while. She taught, she worked as a human shield in Colombia. She did incredible things. So all that was there, but then also her complaining, you know, the nuthatch was dumb because it walked down, you know, and I don't even know if I know what a crepe myrtle is. She's from Texas, so, you know, but she thought those were stupid. And, you know, it's like, how do you put together these two sides of a person, you know? So, and I adored her in many ways, you know, and so anyway, I don't really know what to say except that, you know, she was a complex figure, and I tried to capture that.
And somebody's commented that she's back gentle.
Yes.
That line that haunts is
Yeah.
very haunting.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, I think after someone's died, you do in some ways start to forgive them and to see them with compassion, you know, when they were annoying face to face. When they're not in your face, you begin to see them in a more kind and compassionate way.
The edges have softened.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Carl is asking me if I have favorite poems by other poets about volcanoes, and Elizabeth Bishop's Geography 3 comes to mind. I'm trying to think if there are others that are about, you know, because I always look for volcanoes in images, but I think more of books than poetry. And there was another question in here, was from my friend Blythe, what has been one of the most surprising discoveries you've had regarding volcanoes? And I really have to say, it's the sound of them.
Wow.
You know, every volcano sounds different. And sometimes it's, you know, this snapping, crackling of lava on the surface, and it surrounds a tree, and the water in the tree explodes, and it's really loud. It's like fireworks. And sometimes it's a very low rumbling sound, and sometimes it's like a train. It's this constant, each one that I have seen in Eruption has been different, and I never expected that or knew that. And you wouldn't know that to look at pictures. You would just know that to hear them. So, certainly welcome somebody's asked if I created a poem that focuses on the sound. I'm not sure that I have done one that's just about the sounds of volcanoes, but it's come up. So I want to ask you, Betsy, you put together your 10th collection of poetry, and I think you said it doesn't get easier, but you must have learned some things along the way. And so tell me a little bit about how you put together a manuscript and how you know when you're ready to do that.
Well, I often try to put one together about a year before I'm ready. And what happens is I lay all the poems out on the bed. I used to put them on the floor, but we had dogs, and the dogs would somehow have their own idea of how to organize papers. So I get the itch to see if I have a book, and I lay them all out, and I see that I don't have enough. I don't have enough layering or depth. So then I just lay it aside and I write. And I really do feel like I just shuffle because if your structure is too obvious, it becomes boring in a way. So you can't do that. You can't have childhood poems and then adolescent poems, and you have to find another way. And to me, I feel a little bit like I'm at a casino or something, and I'm dealing out the cards, just trying, trial and error to start to see what works. And when I was putting this book together one night, just before I went to bed, I read the first section and it was awful. And I just had this horrible feeling how bad it was. And I thought, boy, I'm not going to sleep now. And then this little voice in my head said, you can change it, I'm sure if you're the kind of poet who writes a project book, then it might be easier in a way to see how, at least the general arc of it. But I just write poems, and then I have to see how they can talk to each other. And some poems got left out of this book. Well, it was beginning to be too fat, I thought, but some poems got left out because they didn't fit, or I already had a book in the poem about that same thing. And, so there's a lot of stuff like that. I don't know. I did, Bruce Waggle has a book of poems. I think we were talking about this, where the color white appears from poem to poem. In one case, it's a lily. And then in another poem, he sees a woman with a white shawl. And the poems are relatively different, but you can trace this thread all the way through. And it's just enough. It's just enough to make you feel confident that the person that put this book together had a vision and had a purpose. And you just can trust the artist knew what he was doing.
Somebody's asking if a theme or pattern eventually evolves as you write, because you said you just keep writing.
Yeah. I think often the poet's the last person to know. But I guess, yes. I mean, I think sometimes Robert Haas has a poem called Dragonflies. I'm sorry, I'm a stutterer and I stutter on M's. I don't know why. Dragonflies mating. And it's in 5 or 6 parts. And the first part he wrote and it was about Native Americans in California, and he wrote the first part, and then he felt like, I don't have a right to write this. So he wrote a second part to correct that. And then he thought, well, I'm talking about a subject, but I'm not putting myself in the poem. So he wrote a part to put himself in. And around part 8 or 9, the dragonflies appear. But it was, each part was was an answer to the part before, or a call and response. So I think sometimes themes emerge like that.
Yeah, I think of a thematic work easier in a chapbook or in a shorter form, whereas a full length being more and how you bring together all these different thoughts and what connects them is sometimes not always easy to see.
Right. I know with the last part of my book, it's all poems about grief. And I tried to put an angry poem in about my Trumper handyman, just to break up that mood. So it just wasn't quite so heavy.
Somebody, Sheila's asking me if I started to make, she's saying she started to make connections. My mother as a chemist and potter glazing, and did her background influence my interest in volcanoes? Absolutely. I mean, my mother was both a scientist and an artist, and she had a degree in chemistry from Barnard College, and at a time when not a lot of women studied chemistry. And she was a stay-at-home mom, but she taught labs at the University of Connecticut branch, and she became a potter, and the glazes and the kiln. And when I see a lava field, a cool lava field, it looks like pottery to me. The lava dries like glass, it's made up of sand, and so it has the sheen and patterns of glazes, and that combination of science and metaphor and art is just, I think I grew up with that, and that becomes so much. I thought we might want to end, Betsy, by each asking each other to read a poem from the other's book. And
you don't mean I read your poem, do you?
No, I didn't.
Because
I would ask you to read a poem, and you would ask me to read.
Yeah. I just got scared for a minute because I can't read your poems as well as you can.
No, but it was so hard. We talked about this a little before, that we might do this, and it's so hard to choose because this book is just wonderful, and you just see all these poems I had marked on them, and I couldn't quite decide. There's a lovely one about Vincent van Gogh in heaven, and there's also this Advent and Lamentation that has some beautiful images in it, and I can't decide between them, so I'll let you choose. Vincent van Gogh or Advent and Lamentation.
I'll read Vincent van Gogh. Oops.
Great. It's a wonderful setup for our open call for ekphrastic poetry next month.
I just have to find it.
Page 103.
Thank you. All right. I don't think I need to say anything about it. To Vincent van Gogh in heaven. After the gunshot, did the crows scatter or swarm? If heaven has a gate, is the latch on the inside or out? You with your bandaged ear, just the lobe, not the whole rose of it, dead-headed as I first thought. You who can make the tamest flowers wild, make any field stubbled and lush, dizzy with lilies under the stars. And on my way home from walls hung with your sagging boots, plowed fields, lumpy potato eaters, sunflower love, make everything on the street a bright shock. First, the rudden peel of a door's blue paint, then the thick bark of trees and the glint of my dropped keys under the streetlight. One sad, whose lock is long forgotten, two with sockets they still fit. And now rain washes the street, tail light red, caution yellow. Rain that kept you inside, wild-eyeing your room and remembered gardens. Inside your troubled head, the yes and no of you, doubter of everything you did, believer too, saying heaven, hello, and goodbye, and may I come in. Vincent, may I call you that? Because I crave your gouges and grooves, your paint so thick, it's more real than the drenched iris out under my window. Because your skies pulse with such abundance and abandon, I want to believe even in anguish. You turned a knob and the lock sprung, the doors flew apart, snapped their hinges and still hang loose on their jambs and open.
That is so beautiful and so evocative.
Thank you. So I had two ones to ask you to choose. One is the one with the name I can't pronounce on page 65.
It's an Icelandic name.
Yeah, part of me wants to have to pronounce that word. The other one is on page 74, Meteorites in Bethel, Maine.
Oh dear. That's a hard choice, but since
Maybe
I'm
you can
about to
read
head
it.
to Iceland, I think I'll choose the Icelandic
Or
one.
maybe you can read both. It's your book launch. You can read.
Okay, somebody's asking if I've been to the Galapagos, and I haven't, and it's high on my list. So first I'll read Fagradalsfjall Pilgrimage. And if there's anybody from Iceland here, they can correct my pronunciation. But pilgrimage, noun, a long journey undertaken as a quest or for votive purpose. My life has been a pilgrimage of sorts, this obsession with volcanoes since childhood, to see the earth in liquid fire, to witness primal movement, beginning and ending of time. I climbed the mountain, head bowed, paying attention to the narrow path beneath my feet, my boot treads worn from many other climbs. I fall on my knees, they're scraped and bruised before the steep ascent begins. An old man passes me, a cane in hand, white hair blown back. He's done this countless times before, not here perhaps, but other mountains, other quests to see the earth anew, a different view. A woman with a baby in a pack in front. My camera's in my backpack, my tripod slung across my shoulder. We each have burdens carried on this journey, this vow to feel the heat and see the world aflame. A line of people, multi-hued, move slowly up. The slope is steep. Climbing higher, the sun goes lower. The clouds now shaded orange in the purple twilight. Earth's pulse visible in the plume that rises to the sky. Reaching the ridge, the people settle, some spreading blankets, some moving closer, all watching the lava build up in jagged edges of black cinder cone until it spills into a river and thrusts in the air with unspeakable force. The trek down descends into darkness. Sleet and rain wash us clean for the final half mile. And because you said I can, I'm going to read both of them. All right. Meteorites in Bethel, Maine. So we'll come back to Maine for this last poem. Oldest matter we can touch, pieces of dying stars. Everything is made of this, simply stardust. I pause in the Rock Museum in Bethel, Maine, transfixed by crystals in their cases, translucent orange gemstones of outer space. I'm seeing rocks older than our planet, older than the granite of Maine's rocky coast, where my bare toes in summer trace the lines of the ancient magma intrusions in boulders on the shore. I came here to find my footing, discover my roots in granite plutons or tourmaline, Maine's native gem. Instead, I'm connected to the stars. Oh, there's Munilustra here, 10 million years old, found in Sweden's Lapland, where my mother's family's from. A fractured moon rock found in Connecticut, where I grew up. As a child, I studied astronomy in summer at the Stanford Museum and Nature Center. I begged my parents to buy me a star globe. Projecting stars on my bedroom ceiling, I slept peacefully tucked in under my artificial night sky. New stars being born in Orion's nebula, this comforts me now, like that blanket of stars in my bedroom. I'm feeling small as a gem in a fractured universe of time that began long before and will continue long after I've been long gone. Thank you. Thank you so much, Betsy, for doing this with me. This has been really fun, and what a way to launch my book. I'm thrilled.
Beautiful book.
Thank you for sharing your beautiful book and your beautiful poems. And this conversation's been great. And let's have a cup of tea soon.
Okay.